All right, Joe. We are back.
We're back.
SCP Redacted, the SCP podcast.
Redacted.
Right. It's about redacted things you can't know about it.
Yeah.
Just kidding. It's about SCP Foundation lore, theories, and information. And we're going to get into a lot of it today.
Yeah, we got a lot of information to go over.
Yeah, so much so that I can almost guarantee I'm going to get multiple things wrong. But that's kind of the point of some of these really, really long SCPs where it's, there's so many connections to other articles and other teams and GUIs and stuff.
It's all kind of like a spider web where you can follow one thread throughout it and still not understand the whole thing.
Right.
You could know all the teams and all the stuff that all the SCPs they encounter and still not know everything.
Yes. So today we are talking about the SCPs that are so long that, you guys didn't want to read them and we read them and now you don't have to.
Yeah. We were up all night reading them.
Yeah. So let's get into it.
Yes.
So first one we're going to cover today. And actually, before I start, I should say that we're not going to go through lots of SCPs here. We're going to go through two.
Yes. Two big ones.
Because they are very long and there's a ton to break down. And so even that, though, we're going to be breaking these down much more than we normally break down SCPs. But, if you want the experience of these SCPs, you actually do kind of need to read them.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the joy of SCP is reading.
But if you want to just be like, okay, I cannot read this. It's like way too long. I want to know the gist of what happened and some explanation and some ideas and theories and lore. We did the grunt work for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first one that we're going to cover is probably the longest SCP on the site that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
Which is what happened to Site 13, SCP 1730.
And you'd think that would be a simple answer.
Yeah, it's gone. It's neutralized.
It's nowhere.
Who cares, right? So the story of what happened to Site 13 takes place in multiple
dimensions
and dimensions. There are numerous links to other SCPs because it's about an SCP site that contained a bunch of SCPs. It's got several kind of already established MTF units.
Right.
It's got a lot going on. So we're going to try to break this down fairly succinctly, but, you could talk about what happened to Site 13 for hours and hours and hours. It's such a lengthy document that we're kind of hitting even this in this podcast form. We're really hitting the bullet points.
So why don't we start with where Site 13 started?
Sure. Site 13 in our reality was a site that was planned to be built in Alaska, but never got built.
Oh, so that's what happened to it.
Yeah. And that's the story.
It just wasn't built.
And then that wasn't built.
On to the next one.
Yeah. It never got built. However, the Site 13 or the version of Site 13 that we know was discovered in Texas.
Yeah. Right along the border.
Right. Which is very strange. It was supposed to be in Alaska, was never built in our reality. And then it was just discovered in Texas, but it's in a state of complete disrepair.
Right.
The building seems unstable, almost like it's about to cave in. There's noises from what seems to be some kind of generator or incinerator inside, and flashes of light, and there's kind of power on and off in the facility. And it's a very strange collection of buildings.
Yeah.
And obviously the Foundation assumed that it was some kind of, the site got transported here from some other reality or dimension or what have you.
Well, buildings just don't usually appear out of nowhere.
Right. Unless it's like a Starbucks, but those are just everywhere.
Yeah.
Not sponsored by Starbucks. All right.
But maybe.
Starbucks, if you're watching, Mr. Starbucks. So they decide to investigate, obviously. They send in a series of teams. We're going to go over several of them in a little bit more detail.
Yeah. And this is where the bulk of the entry comes from, because it's not really, describing it. We pretty much just described it. It's a building.
Right.
Containment is just, it's there.
Right.
Or used to be there.
Yeah, it used to be there. We'll get to that.
But the length of this is from all of these different teams going in and exploring it and figuring out what happened to Site 13.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of like structured like a movie.
It is in a lot of ways.
It would make probably the best SCP movie because it's so big, but it's very direct. You have all these teams going in to figure out what happened, and they're encountering all these SCPs along the way. It's all very cinematic.
Right.
And, there's a climax, which we'll get to.
All right. So please forgive me and Joe if we're mixing up what events happen with what teams. There literally is just so much that's happening with all of these. But essentially, the first team that they send in are known as the Mudslingers. At this point, the SCP Foundation literally has no idea really what they're going to find in there. As the Mudslingers sort of descend through the facility, they find several different kind of ominous writings on the wall.
Yeah, saying, "Don't look at the wall."
Yeah, they don't look at the wall. There's others that say bleed or what happened to Site 13. And what they discover is that when they get farther and then they try to track back, that the building actually shifts and moves. So you're not able to get out as easily as you'd have thought, even if you kind of think the general schematic.
Yeah.
Things are constantly moving. So it's a little bit of a haunted house.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, they did have like blueprints for the planned Site 13 that they were using.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because it shifted realities, there's some sort of reality bending element that's changing the building even within our own dimension.
Right. Yeah. There's it's definitely an unstable facility.
Yes.
And the reason it's unstable is because of the Thresher device. The Thresher device, we find out in later logs, is some kind of reality. It's supposed to keep the reality stabilized, I believe.
Yeah.
When you're like incinerating and getting rid of these powerful SCPs, but they never refined the technology.
Right.
So the Thresher device actually does the opposite and makes all the reality all around the Thresher device unstable. The various teams also find a giant incinerator that seems to be responsible for burning and incinerating SCP anomalies.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates like blood in this horrible black ooze that is the result, I guess, of the incineration process of these SCPs.
Well, I'd imagine some of them are made of hardier stuff, and you burn it and you're left with a goop.
Yeah. They find a sea serpent at one point that comes out of the goo. A lot of people presume that to be SCP-3000, which would make sense.
Yeah.
On a Tashisha. I think
On a Tashisha.
I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. A Nuntashisha. Which, for those who don't know what a Nuntashisha is, SCP-3000 is a giant sea serpent, believed to be a Hindi god, and it causes memory loss and headaches. You forget everything and confuse. You get confused and irrational and illogical.
Yeah.
And the serpent uses that to consume you, but when he consumes humans, he releases this black ooze that the Foundation uses as their amnestics. So that might have some kind of relationship with the black ooze.
Yeah.
In the facility.
Well, I mean, it's a massive thing. So I'd imagine when they try to incinerate it, they might have been able to reduce its size, but obviously they weren't able to kill it, and probably were just left with a huge mess on their hands.
Right. In several of the rooms, they find humans that have fire coming out of their ears, flashes of white light. And a lot of times those kind of situations causes their telecommunications to fade in and out with command.
Well, that's the result of the cognito hazards that
Correct.
are like on the wall. And like, once you see it, that's what happens.
Right. So they eventually lose contact with all of the Mudslingers. And, that's when the Foundation goes, okay, we're going to send in another team. We got to figure out a way to kind of protect them a little bit more. Like, we just don't want to keep sending people in. So the next people they send in are the Gulliver's Travelers. I believe this is a 3-man team.
Yeah, I think they're like more of a science-based team.
Yeah, so the second team that they send in, I believe it's Y-24.
Yeah, Y-24.
Known as Gulliver's Travelers. They go into a different part of the facility than the original team, the Mudslingers, and they're trying to investigate the power core.
Yeah.
Because they know, even just from viewing on the outside, that there is some kind of power in the facility. At first, they find the entrance into the sort of main power facility where the generator is to be locked. And normally this is where they would just use explosives, but they deem the building to kind of be too
unstable.
Right. They don't want to have it collapse. So they reach back to command and see if someone who might have been in the process of like the original development of Site 13 that never happened, if someone would have the proposed code, it would have worked. And turns out they actually do. I think it's Director Jameson.
Yeah,
I might have the name wrong, but essentially, they had what was going to be the code. From the site plans that never happened, and that worked. When they get in, they realize that several of the cores are not functioning at all, and then 3 are functioning at full capacity, but one of them is basically like superheated.
Mm-hmm.
and might blow up.
Yeah.
As they continue their exploration, and there's definitely things I'm kind of missing or skipping over here. They walk into a room that has like 10 stark white bodies and stuff like that. But some of the stuff that I'm skipping, I either wasn't 100% sure what that meant or what the connection was, or, I'm just trying to get to the juicy stuff here.
Yeah.
Anyways, so they start descending a giant staircase, and that's when their video feeds kind of cut in and out until it goes completely out. And then a week later, their video feed comes back in for 13 seconds. So clearly at this point, the Foundation, they're just like, all right, this place is way too dangerous. There's cognito hazards everywhere. There's giant slithering creatures. There's people with white bodies and fire coming out of their ears. And there's this undistinguishable black ooze. They needed time to prepare for the next full-on mission.
Right.
So they send in a drone. And the drone is able to retrieve several documents and send that back. The drone itself eventually also gets destroyed or unretrievable or whatnot. But it's able to send several floors. I believe they said that it was more floors than what even made sense geographically. But some of the information that it gleamed was about Elijah, who is going to be kind of one of the central characters here. Essentially, there was a SCP researcher who was in stark opposition to what the Foundation was doing, where they were incinerating certain anomalies. And one of them was a boy named Elijah, who was a reality bender and really only had the brain capacity of a child.
Yeah.
But was ridiculously powerful. And they even make a point to mention that they don't think death would be able to contain Elijah because his powers over reality are so intense that they were fearful that the incinerator would do what the Foundation intended the incinerator to do, which later kind of turns out to be true because
little did they know
several of the bodies that they've been seeing so far, the black ooze and the tentacles, they presumably it's all sort of controlled under a hive mind by Elijah, who when he was incinerated and he kind of became in the goo, was able to reanimate the other SCP anomalies that were in the same kind of goo with him. Some of them seem now to kind of have their own sentience, and then other ones, are essentially just kind of his puppets. And we'll get to a few more of those later.
Right.
But the drone is eventually destroyed, and they're going to send in another team.
Yeah, another team.
The reason, I don't remember if it's for the mole rats or if it's for Samsara. It might have been Samsara. I might be getting ahead of myself. But at one point in here, the Foundation essentially deems this place too dangerous and that they're they're not learning anything that's so important that they're just going to keep putting their teams in. But then they get a distress signal from inside the facility where a doctor from the Site-13 claims that there are survivors.
Very big twist.
Right.
Because you'd think everyone would be dead inside by now. But there's like a small contingent of like various facility personnel still alive. And I think they're like near the reactors, right? Like the power reactors.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that they could be, but since the building's always shifting, I think it's one of those things where they found a place that had limited supplies, and now the supplies are running thin, but they can't find their way out.
Right.
And it's too dangerous for them to get out. We find out later that it's not just, faculty and researchers that were into old Site-13, but we later find some of the people that we presumed were dead from the earlier teams had found their way to this site.
This little safe haven.
Right. So the next team that they send in are the Mole Rats.
Which, really cool name.
Really cool name. These guys are supposed to be kind of the team that specializes in very dangerous, anomalous, location-based SCPs.
Yeah.
From my understanding. And several things happen with the Mole Rats. At the first part of their incursion, there's one of the floors collapses, and one of the Z9 members falls through. Kind of his teammate hops down in there. The Mole Rats get separated. These two Mole Rats get separated from the rest of their unit.
Mm.
And essentially one of the Z9 members has to put down the other Z9 member after he gets attacked by one of these black tentacles, and he's essentially putting him out of his misery.
Yeah.
But on the video feed, we then find that both of the Z9 members were essentially attacked. And the one that was shot by the other, they kind of get their eternal peace, but the other one that's survived, he's essentially this reanimated corpse now controlled by this tentacle monster.
Yeah. Terrible fate.
Yeah.
And I think
it's kind of a recurring theme.
Yeah. I think another thing that happens to the Mole Rats is like they're descending a staircase.
Yeah.
And they encounter the goo and
starts rising.
Yeah, it starts rising, and the point man, his legs get covered in the goo, and then they pull him out. He's missing his legs, but he still feels that they're there, and he can stand, and it looks like he's levitating, and like they can pass their hands under where his legs should be, and he just now has invisible legs.
Right. Yeah. And this is something that definitely I did not think about at all at the time when we were going through this. But I just happened to stumble upon someone on Reddit that said their theory with that is that somehow when he got into the goo, which is full of all of these like melted down anomalous SCPs, that somehow the same thing that happened to Josie the half cat happened to him, because later, and this is skipping way to the end, but it's kind of the only part that makes sense to bring this up. The Mole Rat eventually makes it out, spoiler, but he talks about how he doesn't think it's a phantom pain because he can feel his legs at all times, and occasionally he feels a wet furry texture rub up against him, which would make even more sense that if it was like Josie the half cat, like rubbing up on him.
Yeah. As cats are one to do.
Yeah. So I did not pick up that at all in my initial read, but that random guy who commented that, smart. I think he's right.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing about this is, there's just so many little parts. Like we completely forgot to mention Bobble the Clown,
which is one of my personal favorite SCPs. If any of you guys watched the animation we made on it, that was kind of one of the main parts of this that we focused on.
Yeah.
Was the Bobble conversation.
Certainly was. I rewatched it last night in preparation. I was like, man, there's just so much that we just couldn't cover.
Oh, we covered like 1% and we tried to tell the whole story because we didn't think that we were going to be able to do multiple videos on this, but I mean, it would have taken us like you can easily make a 3-hour movie out of what happened to Site 13 and still skip a lot of the good stuff. But yeah, so 2 of the mole rat MTFs enter a room where a television screen promptly just opens up, and one of them recognizes that it's Bobble the Clown. And they have a conversation with Bobble, but he states that he is not Bobble. He is the thing that used to be Bobble.
Yes.
So he was, reanimated by Elijah. They describe it as he's distorted and he's moving around like erratically. So like he'll bounce from like standing on the walls to being upside down to like his different parts of his physical nature are shifting and whatnot. He describes it as, and this is where we get a little bit more of the backstory, how he calls him Daddy Emerson, but Director Emerson of this Site 13, how Emerson was playing with the strings of the universe.
Yes.
Which is referring to the Thresher device. And that he put every SCP into the meat grinder, which is the incinerator.
Right.
So it's kind of just confirming everything, but it really kind of highlighted the horrific nature of it.
Yeah.
Because to me, when I was reading it, obviously like it's horrible, like all the horrific things you were hearing about, like the incineration and whatnot, but you kind of weren't, you're, at least to me, I was like, well, the Foundation usually doesn't do stuff without a reason.
Yeah.
So like maybe they were forced to first for whatever reason, but Bobble was kind of the point for me where I put the final nail in the coffin, where it's like, no, they just went way too far in this reality. Like it wasn't about containing it. It was just about eliminating anything that they deemed anomalous in any shape or form.
Yeah. And that's one of the cool things about this story is like you get more and more information about what happened to the site and like different aspects to it. And like, that's really coalesced into Bobble the Clown, who's kind of like, he's like that character in a slasher movie who's like, don't go any further. Don't go to Camp Crystal Lake. It's
right.
Like, he's kind of there to like warn people away, but also kind of reveal important information to the audience as well. Which is, it's a nice dynamic to the story.
And boy, does Bobble hate Emerson. Tell you what, we had to change a line in the animation. I'm not going to say it just in case that for whatever reason we'd get demonetized, but trust me. Bobble the Clown has some very specific things that he suggests the MTF do to Daddy Emerson if they find him. Not nice things. So I'm kind of blanking a little bit on what specifically happens directly after
They encounter Bobble.
The Bobble encounter.
This is around the time they send in Samsara.
Right. Eventually they lose contact with the mole rats the same way that they've lost all the three. And I should mention, I think I forgot to mention this earlier, that the mole rats were kind of the first unit that got sent in where they had special helmets and visors that were designed to filter out the cognito effects of everything that they were seeing.
Yeah.
But there's multiple times where one of the cool things about the mole rats, I almost forgot to mention. I think this is sometime after Bobble, but they run into a reality bending SCP that is literally like warping the room around them. And they have these special devices called reality anchors that sort of tether everything in place, at least temporarily. And they had to use that to kind of ward off this entity. I think the entity was 2316. Could be wrong about that. Might be mixing up my numbers here. But essentially what happened to one of the mole rats, and I remember this specifically because we started it in our animation this way.
Yeah.
Was that this entity that was warping the reality around him was causing, all the objects in the room to sort of meld in with walls, and everything was becoming like a mixed up mass. Like all their cells were kind of integrated together. One of the mole rats, they essentially became part of the ceiling and the wall and the floor. So, not a great way to go.
Definitely not.
So, when we did the animation, we kind of imagined that like almost like when Robin Williams is going into the quicksand floorboards or whatever.
Oh yeah.
That
was the classic film Jumanji.
The bad one before they got good with Kevin Hart and The Rock.
Still need to see that third one.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, but it was probably a lot more horrific than that. It probably wasn't just like, oh, there's a hand here and an arm here. It was probably like, cell by cell, he was getting like consumed into everything and mixed up into the same entity. But yeah, they lose contact with the mole rats. And this is when they're like, okay,
bring out the big guns.
Yeah.
The biggest guns.
Biggest guns. Yeah. We need to send the team like this. This is not an exploration team. This is a team that's specifically just sent in to rescue everyone and get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
So they send in Tau 5 Samsara. They have kind of their own history that I'm not going to get into because it's a whole nother video, but,
they're like clones of a cybernetic god.
Right. So yeah, that's the very summarized version. But what's extra cool about them is, since they're cyborgs, they can be modified with all kinds of special attachments and weapons specific to the mission that they're about to go on. And in a lot of ways, they're kind of functionally immortal because you can download all their memories and then put it into a cloned version of themselves.
Yeah.
So
we could get into if that is immortality or not.
Right. It's transcendence.
It certainly is transcendence. I just don't know if you'd keep the same consciousness.
It's a fair point. Anyways, that's for our other new podcast that's coming out where we
existential questions raised by SCP.
But they're badass is the point.
Yeah.
So they get teched out with even more advanced visors than the mole rats have. They have all kinds of insane arm weapon attachments. One has a cannon. They have like flamethrowers and stuff. They have special legs that are spring loaded so that they can jump from crazy high heights and land safely, which they actually use later.
Oh.
But yeah, they're trying to discover where the survivors are, which, as we've already discussed, is very difficult because the building's always shifting. So the way they kind of are able to track it down is they find these leeches that are coming from the walls. And that's something that we kind of skipped over earlier, but there's lots of leeches.
Yeah.
Big
old leeches
all over this facility. The leeches are kind of what I assumed is the major way that Elijah can take over someone's body.
Yeah.
That's probably what happened to the mole rat Z9 guy that got consumed. It's they are able to like bury inside you, and then you're controlled by Elijah. But because they're controlled by Elijah, they can communicate telepathically with Elijah, and the Tau 5 Samsara units are able to use these special attachments on their body to essentially tap into the brains of the leeches and get a layout of...
Yeah, because they're all kind of telepathically connected.
Right. So they get this sort of rough layout, and from that map, they're able to deduce where they believe the survivors are. And they decide to take the quickest path to get there, even though it's kind of... They think it might be the more dangerous path because it's an area where most of the leeches are very quiet, or they avoid. Part of that kind of beeline to where they believe the survivors are takes them to a server room where they run into this bizarre creature that has so let me see if I can get this right. 6 legs, 18 arms, 36 forearms, and 72 hands. I believe that's right.
Definitely 72 hands.
Definitely 72 hands.
They sat there and they counted them. They're like, all right.
They're like, it's not 71, but 73 looks too many. No, yeah, it's this insane creature. We tried to draw him in our animation, but we were just like, I mean, that's just so many.
Yeah. Well, to me, it kind of sounds like something where it's like, that video effect where there's like a strobe after you're moving.
Right.
It's like that, but it's just all
right.
Some sort of flesh.
Or kind of, it always made me think of like, the dancers, when then you see like the multiple
when
arms come out and behind them. Yeah, that's immediately pops in my head. But that's not where the strangeness of this monster ends, because it doesn't have a face.
Yes.
What's
on its face?
Where a face normally would be is sort of a large, almost looks like a circular table. It's got all these kind of crazy hieroglyphs written all over it in a strange script. And then there's a naked man who is screaming in pain. He looks like an excruciating agony. And something about this server room, there's so many details that if you're not reading this, you're trying to summarize it, you're just going to forget a million details. But the server room that they're in, it's negative 20 degrees Celsius. it's controlled by this cryogenic chamber
Right.
above them. And for whatever reason, there's no audible noise in this room. The only noise that is able to be perceived is the screams of this man that's attached to the table, which is the face of this horrific monster. And even that, visually it looks like he's like screaming in excruciating pain. But I think somehow the muffled audio nature of the room and makes it be perceived as more of like a high pitched whine.
Yeah.
There's some kind of anomalous effect. I didn't really understand that part, to be honest with you, like why that was. Maybe someone else will know the connection there with the audio element. I did not pick that one up. I'm sure it's another link to a different SCP.
Possibly. I don't know. In my mind, the simplest explanation would be that the monster is having like a reality bending effect on him. And like his voice can barely escape. So the only register that actually escapes is the highest pitch.
Yeah.
The simplest explanation.
Sure. Kind of like this is another one where at the time, I don't think I really connected the dots, but in later rereads, that is probably Emerson.
Yeah, I think generally everyone,
I think that's the idea.
is like, yeah, it's gotta be Emerson, because who else would get tortured like that?
Right. Yeah. And so the idea is that was kind of Elijah's punishment for the person that killed him and all these other entities. They're able to escape from this monster by blowing up a hole in the wall. And eventually they make their way to
The
survivors. Yeah. There's kind of a famous line in here that we were originally going to put in our animation, and then we skipped because it didn't. We were kind of right in the middle of an action scene, and I felt like it'd be weird to stop the action scene for this one line. But the one of the mole rats that was actually able to survive and find his way to sort of safe haven, he describes the Samsara as the Power Rangers, which is kind of a famous line in there.
Yeah.
So now it's they're full on rescue mode.
Yeah. They've got the survivors. Everyone's there. Now they just got to get out.
Yeah, they got to figure out
the easy part.
Yeah, they got to figure out a plan. But on their way, I think they described it as 27 in total were at the safe haven. And then a handful of those were
previous explorations.
Right. But they run across all sorts of entities on their way out.
Yeah.
They run into what we believe to be Elijah, which is this giant pit that has, I don't remember if they said hundreds or thousands of red eyes.
Yeah. It's like a black pit, but like all red eyes.
Right. They're basically constantly on the run at this point from Elijah. They once again see the Emerson monster. They run into multiple other random SCPs, like the robot that says he's the herald of
Pesterbot.
Yeah,
that was super sad because they run into Pesterbot, and I think he's controlling a much larger robot, and he's like, "I'm the harbinger of your doom," as Pesterbot is one to do.
And they just blast him.
They just blast his head off.
Yeah,
and they're like, "Well, that problem solved."
Yeah. It kind of culminates to where they get into this, what I'm assuming to be an absolutely enormous room.
Yeah.
With these humongous containment cells, because they describe it as the Elijah monster as being 200 feet tall, and that he bursts through into the room. So that means the room has to be at least 200 feet tall, and that there's other doors that are just as tall, essentially, in this room. While part of the Samsara team is just trying to hold back the Elijah, two of the other Samsara team members are able to open two large doors that are in this room, and both contain some of the most powerful entities known by the Foundation.
Yeah. They're also indestructible.
Right. So one of them is SCP-2845, which is the deer, which is one of the stranger SCP articles, and a very cool one. Really messed up one. If no one's read that, we'll have to cover it in detail later on. But the very, very basic premise of that is that it's this large green deer with enormous antlers and horns. It's some kind of god or alien or supernatural being of incredible power that can transmute all matter around him.
Yeah.
So he can turn anything into these giant pillars of flesh. They're these weird columns. The deer has these ice crystalline orbs that constantly circle around the back of its head. Just kind of, this is kind of a little side note, but there's no real way to contain him because of how powerful he is. The only way the Foundation, quote unquote, contains him is through a series of rituals that essentially coerce the deer into being like, yes, I don't need to do anything because you did it all for me because you love me. You sacrificed babies. It's a whole thing. 284
probably like a salt lick too.
Yeah, 2845 is really messed up. We'll get into that in another episode. So that's one of them. Incredibly powerful SCP.
Yeah.
And then another one, possibly even more powerful.
Yeah, the Gate Guardian.
Is the Gate Guardian, which is one of the proposals for 001.
Right.
And here's another little quick side note. I read a comment that based on one of our videos that basically said, well, why do you guys keep saying that there's no canon? Like, clearly there's a canon or canons, and you pick which canon, but saying that there's no canon is inaccurate. But I would disagree with that, because even though there's like quote unquote canons, there's the Broken Masquerade canon, there's the there's tons of canons.
Yeah.
Since anyone can write about anything and connect it with whatever they want, even within quote unquote canons, there's contradictions.
Yeah. It's tough to keep it all together.
This is an actual article that refers to the Gate Guardian, which the Gate Guardian is a 001, which means it's a proposal, which means it might not even be the actual 001.
Yeah.
Which then it, in of itself is like, well, is the gate, because only one of the 001s is supposed to be true. But then there's other articles that refer to Scarlet King being true and whatnot. So in essence, that's already saying
there's multiple.
There's contradictions here. So, so much of SCP Foundation is just, it's so many, it's just different people putting thumbtacks on a giant board, just like this back here, and saying, look at this SCP. Wouldn't it be cool if this is connected and this is connected? And then it's just kind of up to you to say, like, well, the story I like is this section, trying to take it all and make it fit into one story just doesn't work. It's not possible.
Yeah. It's more of just making like your own connections and your own sort of headcanon space that sort of ties it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just so many. There's just so many to kind of keep congruent. And I think they do a pretty decent job.
Yeah. All things considered, like the number of writers and the amount of time that has occurred, it's incredible that the site and the wiki is as consistent as it is. But yeah, there's just a lot that contradict each other, and it does not make sense that you can say that there's a canon or multiple canons at all. There's really nothing. It's all these different data points.
Yeah.
And then some are more formed than others, where it makes more sense if you think about this collection or whatever. But ultimately, whatever's true is just whatever you think is cool and you want to believe in. Anyways, tangent over.
Yeah, let's wrap up the ending of this.
Because this might be the episode, because we've been talking about this for an hour.
It's so long.
We're gonna have to just change it to, we read the longest article, so you don't have to. An undescribable battle happens, and I know a lot of people were upset in the animation that we didn't cover this battle, but I was like, how would we possibly, just from a
animation
standpoint, like it would be a nightmare. Like there's no way we could do it in a week. But then also I was trying to think of like, how would we, like, it literally is like undescribable.
Yeah.
Because the Gate Guardian is supposed to be able to incinerate everything instantly with his fiery sword. And then the 2845 transmutes everything. And then you have Elijah, this 200-foot tall, and, collaboration of entities. It just, would have been so fun to work on it, but we would have needed not a week, but months.
A month to do like a 2-minute battle, but
to just come up with a way to even like visualize that.
Yeah.
So,
I'm almost imagining like the Gate Guardians, like burning the flesh as it regenerates, and it's just a completely insane battle that I think is kind of best left to like your imagination.
Right.
Trying to put it down on paper. It's like that. I would imagine if it was a scene in a movie, you'd see them all coming together, and then somebody would walk out of the room and we'd just follow that person.
Right. Yeah. It'd be very difficult to show, I agree. If it was a movie situation, you'd see them all charge.
Yeah,
probably. And then, flashes or whatnot. The team splits up. Captain Hollis from the Mole Rats, I believe.
Yeah. And then one of the Samsara people.
Right. They split up from the rest of the survivors who make their way out, encountering other various SCPs and anomalous traits. But we're going to fast forward a little bit. The majority of the survivors and the majority of the Samsara team make their way outside when the site then sort of implodes on itself. Presumably because Captain Hollis and the other Samsara member are able to reactivate the Thresher device, which then essentially
flings it to another
which is the reason why this SCP is considered neutralized, because the site is no longer there.
Yeah, it's no longer in our our dimension. It's no longer our problem.
It's another person's problem, but those guys saved, our reality.
Yes. Good on them.
Which I wonder if they, at the time when you're thinking that, you're probably like, wow, I really saved their reality, blah, blah, blah. But I wonder if you feel actually that good if then you just plopped it into a new reality.
Yeah. Well, they could have gotten stuck in between dimensions and never landed somewhere.
That's true. That
could have happened. They could have landed on a Earth that was in the midst of being destroyed.
Right. So the final part of the SCP is the debriefing logs, where we get a little bit more information.
Because there's people there who experienced what happened firsthand.
Right.
They're able to give us a little bit better understanding of how it all came about.
Right. So the very simplified sort of timeline is that
Bob Dole gets elected.
Bob Dole gets elected to be president. Yes, that's true. The Site 13, in the reality that it was constructed in, was the premier SCP facility. There was a para-terrorist attack, and President Dole suspended all funding, or most funding from the Foundation, which led to the Foundation having several containment breaches. At that point, the Foundation was forced to basically be absolved into the GOC, which, if you're unfamiliar with the GOC, is the Global Occult Coalition.
Yep.
And their whole shtick is that instead of containing and studying SCPs, they just want to
get rid of them,
eradicate all of them,
incinerate.
Yep.
That's
right.
That's the policy they institute at Site 13.
Right. So they just start incinerating all these entities. Emerson is the site director who was in charge of all these horrific acts. One of the researchers, Dr. Vera Hadley, who was a former lover of Emerson, basically disagreed with everything that they were doing, and she was the one that was particularly against getting rid of Elijah, incinerating Elijah. And then after she was almost beaten to death by the heads, like the leaders of this new GOC
led SCP Foundation.
She essentially enacted the events that led to the reactor failing and the ooze. And as sort of a last resort, that's when Emerson enacted the Thresher device, which made it end up in our world.
Yeah.
The doctor who's sort of stating all this, I think Dr. Muhammad something. I can't remember his last name. He has a lot of other kind of special tidbits in there, saying, we ended up in this reality, but we could have been floating in between time and space for thousands of years for all he knows. And he mentions at one point that, the coalition was experts at capturing entities much more so than our reality is. Because at one point they even captured, he states specifically the Abrahamic God. That might be referring to 343, which we also have like quote unquote contained, but that's just because he chooses to be here. But they said that they actually captured and killed the Abrahamic God, or maybe they didn't kill him. Maybe they just contained him. Now I don't remember, but there's a lot of other references to other SCPs and whatnot. So the extreme TLDR of what happened
to Site 13 is
there was a site that was essentially controlled by the GOC / Foundation. They incinerated every SCP that they could, and brutally contained the ones that they couldn't. They eventually incinerated the wrong one, who was able to reanimate and control the melted bodies of other SCPs, and a device known as the Thresher device is what
catapulted it across dimensions,
and then eventually also got rid of it.
Yeah.
So that's the extreme TLDR. And even our hour-long
we've been going for a while.
Hour-long now discussion on this is cutting out. We probably covered 10% of what this SCP is all about. So, we read it so you don't have to, but we would encourage you to read it.
Yeah, there's a lot of juicy little tidbits that are interesting, because it isn't just, this is what happened. This SCP got out of containment and caused this to happen. It's like, no, it's a whole collection of different SCPs got together, and they bump into random people, and it's just such a bigger tale than just one SCP doing one thing. And that's what's really interesting, and probably what makes it popular is it's a full-fledged story,
right?
And they're able to because it's from an alternate reality, they can throw whatever they want in, kinda, to make it even more interesting and destroy SCPs willy-nilly.
Right. Yeah, it's really an incredible piece of writing by DJ Cactus, who is one of, if not the sort of premier writer on the wiki. So major props to him. And it got expanded on over time. It's not like he dropped all these logs at once. He added on to it a lot. So it was very clear that this was a major passion project of his, and super to be commended. It's one of the best SCPs, just period, because of its world building and
characters.
The overall, it more so than basically any other SCP. It just really fleshed out this world inside this facility. Now, we were going to get into our second SCP, but I think maybe
maybe we'll have to save it for another
time, because long articles you can talk a long time on. So this has been the longest SCP article,
and maybe even our longest podcast.
Maybe even our longest podcast. If you guys have any additional thoughts, I know we skipped a lot. We talked for an hour, and we still skipped most of the SCP. But if we got anything egregiously wrong, let us know down in the comments. Definitely type in all caps "ding dong."
Big old ding dong.
A big ding dong if you made it all the way during this podcast. And if you have any extra tidbits, if you got hey, a lot of people don't really know this, but I think this part of the 1730 was a reference to this other SCP. Let us know, man. I definitely acknowledge that there's parts of this that just probably went over my head because it's referencing an SCP that I haven't kind of thoroughly studied up on or whatnot. So definitely let us know. Whew.
Yeah.
That's a big one, Joe. We'll
Yeah.
have to cover the other one at another point. We'll keep it hush hush.
Yeah. We won't mention what it is.
Yeah. It's a really good one.
Yeah. Super good.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Kay. And thanks for watching.